6th of October 1941, the Oral-Tula road near Mitsensk, a pale sun scraping across a sky the colour of cold iron as birch leaves skittered over the rutted black earth. They thought Moscow was next. The lead elements of Germany's 4th Panzer Division rolled north in columns. Panzer IVs with 5 CMAV guns and stub nosed Panzer IVs humming through a frost-bitten dawn. They moved like a machine that had never been stopped. Exhaust hung low and sweetly acrid, mixing with the pepper sting of cordite from morning test. Fires as mechanics slapped glacis plates and drivers blinked dust from their lashes. They laughed at tales of tractor tanks. For months the Wehrmacht had cut through the steppe like a scythe through straw, the maps inked with arrows so confident they looked like promises. They believed the Red Army's steel was crude. Past a stand of white birch, a dark shape shifted, silent as a watching animal, the dew on its armour beading like mercury on slate. It waited, patient. The T-34 76 slid forward from shadow, its 45mm sloped glacis turning pale light into a hard sheen, while its 76.2 mm F-34 gun seemed to point at more than men. It pointed at pride. Tracks as wide as shovels bit into the damp loam, the V2 diesel purring a bass note that ran under the ground like distant thunder. It sounded inevitable. A Panzer III commander raised binoculars beneath a leather brim, spotting the stranger's low turret and unfamiliar lines before calling targets with a clipped comb that hid a prickle at his neck. He had never seen armour like this. Fewer! The 5mm KUBK barked, and the shell struck the T-34's glacis with a bright white spark, then ricocheted screaming into the birches, shearing branches like a scythe in a wheat stand. Nothing. Another shot, then another. The gunner wheeling his traverse handwheel until his wrist burned while the loader's breath came hot and ragged against canvas and steel. Still nothing. The F-34 answered with a single, flat crack that rolled over the fields, its muzzle flash blinking like a camera on a death scene as the round punched into the Panzer Kunsu's upper hull. It was like being struck by a train. The turret jerked and belched a square of black smoke as gasoline turned to a quick orange blossom. The crew falling out in flame, streaked silhouettes that rolled in the dust, screaming. The road stank of burning paint. From the tree line came 2 more T-34s. Hull down on prepared scrapes. Armour plates canted like a fist angled to deflect a blow. Their commanders scanning through periscopes greased against frost. The ambush had teeth. German Pak-36 and tank guns rattled up. Their spindly 3.7 cm barrels swung around and chocked into the dark soil as crews slid rounds with practiced hands and lit the fuses of their courage. They were called door knockers, for a reason. The little gun spat and rang against the T-34's hides, hit skidding in bright arcs down the armour until they sang off into the tree line in a storm of metal bees. It was like punching a wall. Within minutes, the radio net was a crush of voices as company leaders called for 8.8 cm flak to be dragged forward, and for flank manoeuvres that died at the edges of the forest. The map no longer matched the ground. In Panzer Leader, Heinz Guderian would later write, "The appearance of the Russian T-34 came as an unpleasant surprise to us. Its armament, armour, and cross-country performance were superior to our available tanks. On this road, surprise had a shape. A report that autumn to the General of Panzer. Troops would record the blunt lesson. The 5 cm tank gun is ineffective against the T-34 from the front beyond 300 metres, attack flanks, tracks, and turret ring. In the hedgerow of birch and smoke, theory bled into fact. Colonel Mikhail Katukov's 4th Tank Brigade had chosen the ground, cutting sight lines with saplings and scraping firing pits that turned steel into sudden ghosts, then slipping away before the counterblow. They fought like hunters. Shell bursts chopped the air into hot metal, Tanged bites as splinters hissed through leaves, and the wide Soviet tracks churned soil into flying ribbons that smelled of rain and broken roots. The earth itself seemed to turn against the invaders. A Panzer IV tried to swing a short 7.5 mm T-34 into line, its rounded turret bumping through a ditch as the loader shoved a high, explosive shell into the breach with a grunt and a prayer he didn't say out loud. The shell burst and did nothing. The T-34's gun flashed again. The German tank's side armour peeled back like a sardine tin, the blast throwing a black smear across the road and a helmet high into the birches where it hung like a grim ornament. Hope hung with it. Engines roared. Orders clipped into silence as receivers went dead, and a squad of grenadiers hugged the ditch line while a Feldwebel cursed the mud and the mad idea of invulnerability. The spell had broken. Somewhere behind the smoke, a crewman in a grey tunic slapped his breast pocket for a photograph and found only grit as he watched that foreign hull angle away, its sloped sides shedding light and lead in equal measure. He finally understood what they were facing. The wind shifted, pulling the curtain of dust to one side, so that for a heartbeat the scene lay still, burnt rubber, thrown tracks, the glitter of shattered glass, and those low, spare silhouettes melting back into trees. The Eastern Front had chosen its messenger. By midday the road belonged to no one and to the dead, and the columns that had rolled so easily across half a continent sat with their hatches open like mouths, too shocked to form a word. The laughter was gone. In the frozen breath of that morning, the new shape of war revealed itself in steel and smoke. A peasant's tank that had learned the language of the unforgiving sky and the black earth alike. On the road to Tula, mockery met the answer only armour can give. 27 June 1941, Operation Barbarossa tore open 800 miles of frontier, with Army Group Center arrowing through Belorussia towards Smolensk and the gates of Moscow. They expected collapse. German panzer divisions, built around Panzers J with 5 SMAMs KOK-38L 42 guns and Panzer IVOS, E with short 7.5 SML 24s moved in fast. Radio tied packets beneath Luftwaffe patrols. They felt unstoppable. The doctrine was a braid of speed, surprise, and close air support. Perfected in Poland and France, and now fed by long lines of fuel trucks and confidence. They called it Blitzkrieg. Across the border, the Red Army reeled, its mechanized corps shattered by poor coordination, purges, and long marches that broke gear before bullets found steel. They bled and learned. Thousands of T-26 and BT-7s burned along dusty roads, their thin armour no match for German high-explosive and 3.7C MIB armour piercing. They were outclassed. Yet tucked among chaos were new shapes, the T-34 76 and the KV-1, issued in uneven numbers, often without enough radios or trained mechanics, but with a promise forged in sloped plate and diesel torque. They were different. Designed at Katpizay in Kharkov by a team led by Mikhail Koshkin and Alexander Morozov, the T-34 had been driven to Moscow and back in 1940 to prove a point to skeptical commissars. It had earned its place. The hull sides were angled at 60 degrees, the 45mm glacis devised not as decoration, but as geometry that deflected penetrators, while the 76.2 mm gun, first the L-11 then the F-34, punched above its weight. It was a fighter in workman's clothes. German intelligence had filed sparse notes on new medium tanks, but frontline officers mostly knew the Soviet fleet as lumbering tractors and obsolete light machines. They were prepared for the wrong war. On the 26th of June 1941, only 4 days into the invasion, Franz Halder wrote in his war diary the dry sentence that hinted at coming shock. The Russian T-34 and KV tanks cause us serious difficulties. Paper felt the first tremor. Army Group Center drove to Smolensk in July and surged past Roslavel in August. The highways clogged with columns moving east under the hot drift of summer dust, and the cool certainty of victory. Momentum was real. But by late September the weather broke. The rains turned roads to axle, deep-paced, and the push toward Moscow, Operation Typhoon, began in a world of brown water and sinking tracks. Rasputitsa had arrived. Guderian's Panzergruppe II swung south, and then east to envelop, angling through Ural toward Mitsensk, and the Ural-Tula road, while supply echelons stretched and maintenance blurred day into night. The timetable tightened like a noose. Opposite them, Stavka threw together fresh brigades from evacuated factories and training depots, hustling crews into machines whose manuals still smelled of ink. Quantity became courage. From Kharkov and Stalingrad to Nizhny Tagil, entire plants began to move on rails under Luftwaffe shadow as lathes, presses, and jigs travelled east to the Urals in a migration of metal. Industry learned to hide. Colonel Mikhail Katukov formed the 4th Tank Brigade in September with a mix of T-34, 7.6 and KV-1s, short of everything except determination, and received the order to fight forward of Mtsensk. He chose the ground. Soviet doctrine bent under pressure, shifting from deep, sweeping operations to ambush and attrition, cutting lanes sighting guns, and letting the enemy drive into kill sacks before striking flanks. They made patience a weapon. German anti-tank crews dragged the 3.7 Semak Park 36 into the mud, proud of drill and speed, unaware that their nickname, Heery Sanklofjut, Army Door Knocker, would become a bitter joke by autumn. Confidence met physics. In the panzer regiments, commanders trusted optics, crew training, and radio discipline to carry them through, and they still believed the solution to any surprise was maneuver. They trusted the system. But the T-34's wide 550 Mundras tracks spread weight over muck. Its V2 diesel shrugged off dust clouds that choked carburetors, and its gun bit at ranges where German gunners still calculated lead. It changed the geometry. As October opened, 4th Panzer Division pushed north from Ural, with reconnaissance out, engineers clearing obstacles, and the regiment's diaries quiet except for weather and fuel. Routine masked danger. Katukov's brigade dug hull, down scrapes along the forest fringes and village edges, wiring approach rotes and camouflaging turrets with brush until steel looked like birch and bark. They prepared to kill. We will hit the advance guard, force them to deploy, and then bleed the column. He later recalled in his memoir, placing the emphasis not on heroics, but on measured delay. Time was the real prize. For the Germans, Moscow was a political and logistical objective, a promise to end the campaign before winter, and to sever the Soviet nerve center. The clock ruled everything. For the Soviets, every hour bought at Mitsensk, and on the Ural-Tula road fed into factory relocation, reserve concentration, and the fortification of the Mozhaisk line under the blunt hands of militia and engineers. A city learned to brace. Generaloberst Ewald von Kleist would later call the T-34 the best tank in the world, a line born not in admiration, but in the cold calculus of combat results and ground lost. Respect arrived late. The stage was set afast, confident Panzer Division on a narrow axis, and a new Soviet medium tank waiting under leaf and fog with a commander who understood both his machine and his mission. Arrogance had an appointment. In that meeting, the reputations of weapons and the pride of doctrines would be tested not in laboratories, but in hedgerows and lanes, under radiostatic and the sting of cordite. The truth would be loud. It began with a 12-cylinder heart, the V2 diesel, 38 litres of aluminum, block ferocity turning 500 horsepower at 1/800 revolutions. The sound a steady hammering that vibrated through track pins and rib cages. It breathed confidence. The hull was geometry as armour, a 45 mm glacis set at 60 degrees, side plates sloped to cheat trajectories, a welder's solution to a gunner's problem in a world where angles were life. It made steel lie. The 76.2mm F-34 gun sat in a stubby, purposeful turret, a tube with a job and no poetry, firing APHE rounds with a muzzle velocity near 680 meters per second and high explosive that broke bunkers and morale alike. It spoke with authority. On the move, 550mm wide tracks spread 27 tons of mass across mud and frost. The Christie suspension drinking shock with long travel arms and big road wheels that made ruts into rumours. It rewrote the map. Inside, the price of power showed itself in ergonomics. A two-man turret where the commander also served as gunner. A workload that stole seconds and situational awareness when seconds were blood. It asked too much. The optics were practical but crude by German standards. TMFD telescopic sight, and PT-4 7 periscope usable, but no Zeiss, while the turret lacked a basket, and the floors bristled with ammunition that bruised shins and time. It was effective, not elegant. Radios 71 TK3 sets were issued in theory to command tanks but in practice were scarce in 1941. Forcing flag signals and guesswork when trees and smoke turned formations into islands. It fought half blind. Yet the fundamentals were ruthless. Sloped plates that bounced 3.7 cm and shots like stones off iced water, a diesel less prone to fire than gasoline, and ground pressure low enough to make the Rasputitsa a nightmare only for others. It was built for Russia. German machines had their own character. Panzer Arthur Osf, J and Panzer IV Osf, E with clean interiors, 5-man crews, and commanders free to command beneath steel cupolas rimmed with vision blocks and pride. They were schools on tracks. The Maybach HL120 TRM, a 12-litre gasoline V12 gave 300 horsepower to well-balanced drivetrains, while the Fuji 5 radio knotted platoons into a thinking fist and Zeiss sights translated intent into hits. They were instruments. But their armour was mostly vertical and thinner, and their early guns, a 5mm 42 on the Panzer Thau and a short 7.5 cm LV-24 on the Panzer IV, were meant for manoeuvre war and infantry support, not for killing angles at range. They were surprised by math. Doctrinally, the Wehrmacht was a composer of combined arms panzers, motorized infantry, engineers, and Stukas woven by radio into tempo, off-drag tactic giving initiative to men who could read ground like a map and time like a weapon. They trusted tempo. Soviet doctrine had dreamed of deep battle, echeloned thrusts and operational shock, but purges in 1941, breakdowns made those dreams walk on splints, and brigades learned to ambush from hull, down scrapes and forest lips. They trusted the land. In the factories, Kharkov locomotive, Stalingrad tractor, later Uralvagonzavod, the T-34 was simplified as it was sanctified, with welded plates over cast niceties and a finish that offended German fitters but delighted spare parts men. It was made for many. The early 4-speed transmission was a wrestler, clutches biting like iron jaws and gear changes that demanded boot, shoulder and prayer, while poor air filters let dust score cylinders until the design caught up. It punished the faithful. Yet the exterior lines hid a tactical thesis. A low silhouette for ambush, a gun that punished at normal combat ranges, and tracks that could cross country. Where roads were invitations to artillery, it made options. German after-action evaluations in late 1941 at Kummersdorf examined captured examples with cold fingers and grudging respect, calling the T-34 extraordinarily modern and urging sloped armour, wider tracks, and longer guns in response. It forced adaptation. Reports from the front added specifics. 3.7 Ret Pak 36 crews found themselves knocking at armour, here a Sankloftjert, until Pak 38s and the 7.5 Siebert Pak 40 banged back, and Panzer Is grew the long 5 cm L60 while Panzer IVs gained 7.5 cm L43 and L48 teeth. It changed inventories inside the T-34. Crews learned to work around what the machine did not give them. Hand signals inside headsets, briefed sectors of fire, and commanders who split their minds between sight picture and radio silence. It made men into systems. Inside German turrets, commanders stood tall in their cupolas, free hands manipulating radios and ranges, drilling rapid target handovers that piled seconds into survival and survival into kills. It made systems into men. Both sides wrote doctrine with steel. The Soviets set traps and ate distance. The Germans countered with fire discipline and flanking drills, each new encounter drafting revisions in cordite and maintenance logs. It was a duel of learning. In that duel, the T-34's character was not perfection but balance armor, firepower, and mobility in a package crude to the touch and devastating at the muzzle. A tank shaped by a continent and a crisis. It was a worker-made warrior. And as autumn hardened the machine's personality, broad tracks, canted plates, diesel thunder, merged with a doctrine of patience and bite, turning every birch grove and village verge into a lever against momentum. It was the lever that moved a war. 6 of October 1941, north of Oral on the Oral-Tula Road, frost lifting off the birches as a thin sun edged the fog like a knife. The lead elements of 4th Panzer Division pushing into a corridor of pale light and darker timber. They thought the road would yield. Kampfgruppe Eberbach, Panzer Regiment 35 at the point, engineers and infantry tucked close, rolled in radio, tied packets, antennas trembling. Commanders upright in cupolas reading ground and distance. They trusted drill. Across a shallow swale, Colonel Mikhail Katukov's 4th Tank Brigade waited in scrapes cut into the tree line, T-34 76 hull, down and KV-1s posted like silent boulders, periscopes smudged with grease against the cold. They let the enemy come. At 400 meters the German reconnaissance bikes flickered through, then half tracks, then the 1st Panzer Eitherossf, J-nosing past a hedge, the 5C Clark L-42 elevated a hair as if sniffing the air for trouble. It smelled wrong. A Soviet gunner in a low turret whispered ranges and deflection, the commander squinting into the TMFD sight, while holding the whole field in his head, counting seconds by the rhythm of diesel. He waited on breath. The F-34 cracked with a flat, hard report that skipped across the fields like a thrown plate. The APHE round boring into the Panzer Arthur's upper hull and blowing out a square of black smoke and painted dreams. The column flinched. Feuer! Snapped a German voice on the net as 2 more Panzer Furies traversed in unison, the first rounds smacking the T-34's glacis in bright, white sparks before screaming off into birch and frost with the high whine of impotence. They hit, and nothing changed. A 3.7 cm Pak 36 clattered into place, its crew as perfect as drill could make them, ramming around and touching off a shot that struck at a 6° plate and rebounded with a horrible, ringing truth. Here is Anklopterat. Inside the Soviet tank, the loader's breath came in white gusts as he slammed another BR-350A into the breach, the commander calling, Verd, Nalevi, forward, left, just enough to unmask, then settle again in the scrape. He made angles into armor. Flashes strobed the tree line as 2 more T-34s bit at the German flank, one shearing the track off a Panzer IV E and another punching a hole into an engine deck that sprayed fuel and fire across a ditch. The ambush bloomed. In the German lead, Oberst Heinrich Eberbach's orders cut through the rising panic. Deploy, smoke, find the flanks, while engineers dragged fascines and infantry slid to ground with heads low and eyes higher. Maneuver met mud. The radio net, so clean at dawn, turned into a crowd of clipped voices, bearings, and half words as static, and fear began to marry, the Fuggy fez hissing like snakes at the bottom of steel wells. Clarity bled out. A Panzerfahrzeug pushed forward to knife the tree line and took a hit at the turret ring that jammed traverse and taught a loader how heavy a round can be when adrenaline turns to lead. Close was death. At 300 meters the 5 Siemens guns bit better, one round cracking a T-34's mantlet and spalling the inside white hot, the commander dropping with his headset, still clamped as the gunner took over through tears and habit. Even steel has limits. An 8.8 cm of request went up the chain. The flak towed forward from a field where it had been staring at sky that suddenly no longer mattered, its crew counting distance against the weight of a barrel built for altitude. They needed a bigger answer. Die russischen T-34 und KW Arbeiten uns die Schwierigkeiten. Franz Halder had entered into his diary only days into the campaign, and the line seemed to crawl into the hedgerow and sit beside the men as they worked. The words were already true. On the Soviet side, Katukov shifted pairs like a chess player, one firing while the other moved, keeping silhouettes low and plates canted, breaking contact before German optics could solve the problem twice. He fought the map. Gun smoke thickened into a gauze that smelled of hot oil and cordite, and through it a single T-34 rolled, deliberate and menacing, to finish a crippled Panzer IV at 60 meters with a shot that punched and then blossomed. Final answers are simple. Guderian would later write in Panzer Leader, the appearance of the Russian T-34 came as an unpleasant surprise to us. Its armament, armor, and cross-country performance were superior to our available tanks, and the sentence was a postcard from this moment. Pride met physics. Engineers tried to slide an 8.8 cm into a field of fire, only to find the soil too soft and the stakes too high, while riflemen worked grenades and satchel charges that did not want to stick to plates that sloughed off hope. Improvisation broke. When the T-34s backed like ghosts into the trees, tracks smearing wet earth and diesel thudding like a distant drum, they left behind a road clotted with burning hulks, thrown tracks, and a silence that moved with the smoke. Silence can be loud. German, after action notes that week travelled up to the general of panzer troops with a cold directive. The 5mm tank gun is ineffective against the T-34 from the front beyond 300 meters. Attack flanks, tracks, and turret ring. The lesson was official. Eberbach's formation halted to dress wounds and rethink. The advance to Moscow slowed by a brigade that had no intention of holding a line, but every intention of bleeding a timetable. Momentum went missing. By dusk, the birches flickered with embers, and the Oral Tula road breathed heat into the first real cold of October, the air heavy with paint and rubber, and the copper taste of spent brass. Shock sat in every open hatch. In that day's gun camera of memory, the T-34's silhouette snapped into permanence, low-angled, purposeful, while the German confidence that had rolled from the bug to the Oka learned a new arithmetic in steel. The disbelief was real.